Welcome, everybody, to the House of Destiny Network. I am so excited to be here today. Today is a little bit of a difficult day for me, and I was uncertain about whether I wanted to speak today, but and the reason for that being is that today is the anniversary of my dad's graduation into heaven, and today would have been 3 years. So I was a little reluctant to speak today, but I have decided that he would have wanted me to, so I'm going to. And the topic that I want to discuss with you is the reason that I'm doing this specific topic, and you're going to understand in a second, is recently, as I'm watching what's going on in the world, things that are happening worldwide, in the back of my head, I just keep hearing that verse. It's in Matthew and Luke, and it's as it was in the days of Noah, so shall it be when the Son of Man returns. And it just keeps coming back to my spirit. And I'm not saying I think Jesus is coming tomorrow, anything like that. I'm certainly not saying that. As my dad always would say, is it may be the end times, but it's not the end of time. And we are to occupy until he returns. And so that is the mindset that I have, and I know many of you share. We all share that understanding. But I do see some very interesting things that are happening in the world, and it keeps coming back to me as it was in the days of Noah, so shall it be when the Son of Man returns. And so I started to read a little bit in the Bible, and there's two different events in the book of Genesis. And now the book of Genesis is very interesting because, you know, our Western culture and the Western world is based on a Judeo-Christian foundation. And so, you know, we in the West, we have that rooted very deep into our psyche and the way that we think. Even people who aren't Christians kind of have it's just so integrated into our culture and who we are. And if you read the book of Genesis, and when you read the book of Genesis, it's just layer upon layer upon layer of meaning. I know that in Judaism, they have the Midrash, which is at a certain time of year, they read from the book of Noah, from the book of Genesis about Noah and the Tower of Babel. And the rabbis will have sort of deeper interpretations of without taking from or adding to the scripture. They sort of discuss those deeper meanings that are in there, and it's a very interesting thing that they do in Judaism. And I think that we as Christians, we do the same thing. We look at the deeper concept, and I've talked to you about this before. It's almost like being in a boat on the surface of the ocean, and you look around and you say, well, this is the ocean. But if you were to hold your breath and dive underneath and look around, there's so much more. And I feel that is part of what makes the Bible so timeless and sacred. And you know, this isn't just for people who lived back in the day. This isn't a history book. This is so much more. And so in keeping with that train of thought, I think about my dad too, and especially on this day, the time that he lived in. Why is it, and I've asked you this question before, it's a rhetorical question obviously, but why would it be that he was born and lived when he did? Just my dad and us and our ministry. And there's many other prophets in the earth that are true prophets. God uses many people prophetically, even though they may not be a "thus says the Lord" kind of prophet. There are many prophetic people that are functioning in the world, in the marketplace, all over the place. And it's, being a prophetic person is a person who has foresight. And one thing that really stood out to me when I was reading Noah and the Tower of Babel were three things that were going on, and I'll go to my notes here. There has to be a balance, and it's a very thin line between good and evil, and that begins with the individual and then extends out. And I think that what we're seeing today, definitely in America and in many Western countries, is this shift that is rejecting, most importantly, the family. And if you look at what was going on in the days of Noah, what was going on in the days of Noah? There was great sin in the earth. We know that the sons of heaven came down and lay with the women of earth and created giants, and that was, there was a whole lineage and bloodline thing. And when God chose Noah, he actually chose him because it says in Genesis 6, verse 9, "There are the generations of Noah. Noah was a just man and perfect in his generations, and Noah walked with God." And that made me think about his bloodline. And if you look at the Jewish people, how they tracked, this one begat that one, begat that one, begat that one. And we've all read that in the Bible, and that's kind of the part we kind of skip over and we don't think too much about, because it's a little bit like, okay, so this is the son of this one and this one. But it was very important to them that they keep track of that after Noah. So I find that just in itself very interesting, because it was from the line of Shem that we got Joseph and Jesus Christ. So it was through that bloodline. And I often wonder if it's because of who Shem was married to and what was going on there. But that's a whole other topic. We could get into Nephilim giants and all of that, but we won't go there. The interesting thing to me, though, was that there was a family. So what we have now is this attack and this disregard and sort of disdain for the traditional family that you see. And this is in no way to diminish any individual person's value or worth, regardless of what's going on in their life. Okay, because as Christians, we're supposed to be helping people and doing a little less judging. And I see a lot of that, which really bothers me, because I think the balance is off. This is what I'm feeling. And we have, there's three different ways of viewing the world. You have the individual, you have the family, you have the community and the communal view. So through time, you'll have fluctuations of this and how it works. And I find that so interesting, because in the individual-based view, the only thing that matters is the individual, is me. And, you hear that right now. You hear that going on. It's my truth. It's my reality. It's my identity. And it can be whatever you want. I mean, I heard about a woman who married a wall. I forget where from. I must have been over a year ago I read this. But that was her individual, and her argument for this is my individual preference, and I'm not judging her. But the point I'm making here is that that's where that focus on me, the individual, is not balanced with everything else. The individual is important, because if you go to the other extreme, where the community is more important than the individual, so whatever must be sacrificed by the individual is for the greater good of the community, that's when you go to communism. And you see a push definitely for socialism. And my dad prophesied about this. He said they would not implement socialism during this season. There was a 7 years of grace that he had seen and prophesied. And he specifically said from Nashville, Tennessee in 2011, they will not implement socialism. I've covered this on Code Breakers. But what you see is the extremes don't work. The thing that works is the family. A solid family will produce healthy people who will then be able to, it works outwards then into the community, from the individual in the family, then into the community. And the balance of that is so important. And so when I look at stories like what happened to Noah, in the days of Noah, there was much sin on the earth. It was filled with sin. It was very liberal. The earth was corrupt. People were doing whatever they wanted. I mean, they were sleeping with fallen angels or whatever, the Nephilim giants, whatever you want to call them. There was something that happened there with the bloodlines and the genetics of human beings that I find just so interesting, and it's certainly something I'm not educated enough on, but I find very interesting, and the more I find out, the more I'll share with you. But what starts to happen in this kind of environment is that when things become too liberal, and I'm not using that in a political way. I do not mean the political term liberal, although I think that is an influence or a product of even more. What happens is that it's not enough that you're not hurting other people, but if you don't accept the sin, whatever the corruption or sin is, if you are not a participant in it, then you are now rejected. And you're definitely seeing that throughout the world, that if you don't comply with this way of living, then you're all the way on that side, this terrible, horrible person. Now, we have to remember when we deal with these things that we are not dealing with flesh and blood, but principalities and powers. And so your perception of that and how you deal with that is what's so important. I'm saying you, I mean myself too, we cannot allow ourselves to reject, judge, take it out on individual people. When we understand as Christians, especially prophetic people, the spiritual influence that is going on, that is dividing. And I find that it's because that balance is off, because we see the falling apart of the family. There's more divorce now than there's ever been. Abortion has been taken to the extreme of where we recently heard they were trying to pass it in Virginia, I believe, to abort the child after birth. Now, I found out that did not happen. They did not vote for that. Thank God. But abortion's a good example. I am pro-life, obviously. I'm a Christian, but there may be Christians who are not, and I find it difficult to understand why there is the attack on people who are pro-life. Especially when you do move into politics and government and law. That's a very dangerous area there, because I should not be obligated to pay via my taxes for something that I am so against, because I believe that it is murder, and that's where I am, and I'm not going to pretend that that's okay, because it's now become on this extreme, unbalanced, situation that we find ourselves in, that if I don't accept your view of, let's say I'm having a discussion with someone who's pro-choice and I'm pro-life, and if I shouldn't be made to be looked at as a bad person because we disagree on that point, because I believe that abortion is the biggest genocide in human history. How many children have been aborted? Lives have been taken, and this is another thing, because this is what happened with Moses. When Moses was born, the Pharaoh was killing all the sons, all the children, under 2 years old. Same thing happened with Jesus. When Jesus was born, I'm not giving scriptural reference now because it's coming to me as I'm speaking about it. When Jesus was born, the same thing happened. And so I'm seeing a pattern here of the enemy's attempt to stop the birth of something. And my dad prophesied a great move of God, greater than anything we've ever seen on this earth. Many, many times he prophesied it. He said it would make the great moves of the past look like nothing in comparison. He prophesied specifically about California, the last place you would expect that to happen, that there would be another revolution in California, the Jesus Revolution. And so when looking at the story of Noah, and there it is in the back of my head, as in the days of Noah, so shall it be when the Son of Man returns, that there will come that time, and none of us know when it is, but there is something going on, and this is what we need to pray about, and this is what we need to ask for wisdom in, and this is why the prophetic is so important now. And that's not, I don't mean me specifically standing up here or anybody else and saying, thus says the Lord. It doesn't have to be that. It means you in your life, in the way that you view and perceive things, that God can reveal to you glimpses of the future as a guide to where your destiny is and what he has destined for you in your life. And so what will happen? And this is the question we're all asking. I have a lot more to say about this. I haven't even gotten to the Tower of Babel yet and what I found on that. But I wanted to start today, just kick it off. And I think maybe it is fitting that it would be the day that my dad went to heaven. That, we would sort of delve into this beginning there in Genesis and what was going on in the earliest part of the earth, and these struggles that we seem to repeat over and over. I'm sure that at the beginning of the 20th century, the 2 world wars and the Holocaust, things like that, I'm sure then they must have felt that it was the end. So we have to have a balance in our discernment of that as well. And so my prayer today is that God will remove the scales from our eyes so that we can understand, because with understanding, true understanding, and being able to recognize and perceive the season we are in. And this is where I'm looking right now, and I hear it over and over. As in the days of Noah, so shall it be when the Son of Man returns. But there will be something born. And so I think that the attack on the family, the excuse to remove a life from a womb without any reason, the argument's often made about a very small percentage of, life-threatening situations. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about this, where it's just become a casual thing. The woman has the right to choose. This, to me, it's not balanced. And it is reminiscent of when Moses was born and when Christ was born. that the children were being taken. The enemy was trying to stop something from being born, but we all know that he never succeeds. And so there is, I think, the labor pains now of something great that will be born, and that is the season that we're in. And some of you will remember The Woman in the Sky from April 4th of 2009. My dad was in Seattle, Washington. It was the first time he wore the mantle, and God showed him a woman about to give birth. And my mother and I, when the constellations had aligned, and the position of Jupiter, it was 2017, I believe, my mother and I spoke to you about it and showed you that prophecy. And I can post that on our YouTube channels and Facebook pages as well, because it's very interesting that he saw that then, and it was the first day that he ever wore the mantle. So I think I'll stop there today, but I'm going to keep on this thread, because I want to talk about the Tower of Babel as well. There's a lot in there, and there's more about Noah. But I think that beginning with this the way that we have, and thinking about the family, the individual and the community, and the extremes that are putting us off balance, and historically have done so time and again, and how we as Christians need to deal with things in this season. And so I'll continue this soon. The next time you see me, we are going to talk more about Noah and the Tower of Babel. And then while we are doing this, we are going to be looking at our the season we're in, the world that we're living in right now, and some of the pretty remarkable things that have been going on. And, my mom Jane will always jump in on the conversation when we start talking about the end times and eschatology. She loves it. And so I may have my mom join me for one of these, but I do feel that we're in an historical time, and I believe that we should be praying for wisdom, discernment, and understanding. And so I'll leave it there. But before we go, in honor of my dad, I want to play you something just beautiful and in remembrance of him. And so we'll leave you with that today.
Come. Draw close to this altar right now. I must just tell you, everyone watching, because there's so many of you on this stage right now, and I don't make up demon stories, but spiritual wickedness is so afraid. You can say yes or no to me. Thank you. To try and stop us from standing together at an altar to pray. So I will play. surprised that when we build an altar that forces of evil gather around as well. Elijah stood. I want to take a microphone to over there, please. So I need the same sound on that mic. Elijah said to the people, "How long will you be of two opinions? In the presence of the prophets of Baal and the highest form of wickedness in the kingdom of Israel stood Elijah and presented his offering to God." So for the forces of darkness that have gathered around, I ask you to stay. For we will bow our knee to the Lord Christ from north to south to east to west, and you will bow yours with us.
Thank you for watching the House of Destiny's YouTube channel. Please subscribe to get all of our latest content. This video was brought to you by all of our generous supporters. If you'd like to give, click the link in the description. We have new episodes every week, so stay tuned, and remember, you're somewhere in the future and you look much better than you look right now.